had a gruesome injury the first couple months into it. You know what I mean? And so that took a turn. But those early college years was a struggle because I didn't know how to adapt. I really didn't, especially after injury.
So, Kevin, what was life like for you in the early years?
Man, life for me in the early years. So again, I grew up, I was born in Toledo, Ohio, um, back in 1982. So born in Toledo, Ohio, grew up with both of my parents, actually teenagers. What was unique about my story or my early childhood is both of my parents lived in the same street growing up. So I kind of had both grandparents and parents living in the same neighborhood, but also younger teen, parents. And so both of my parents were 16, 17 years old when they had me. So I was raised by both sets of grandparents in our neighborhood. Growing up for me, single family home, like I said, was raised by my grandparents. So kind of got a lot of direction from them, but also lacked that opportunity of having both of my parents in the household and growing up with them. So I felt as a young child, I kind of felt passed around a lot. I felt isolated, but also had a lot of family around. But it worked out for the best, I guess, if you would say.
Yeah. So, Toledo, a much bigger community than
Yes.
this. What was life like in Toledo?
So the early '80s, early '90s in Toledo, life was. I mean, it was for us or for myself, it was kind of chaos, just due to the fact that crack cocaine, drugs, and things was heavy back then. Early years, street gangs, things of that nature was heavy, and neighborhoods and street gangs were claiming and controlling neighborhoods and areas, right? And so things got rough. Things got really rough. But having good grandparents and keeping us out of the way kind of helped with it a lot. But it was very easy to kind of fall into those traps if if you didn't do the right things or you got around the right people and all of that. And so it was rough. It was rough growing up.
Yeah.
It was rough with that.
So when you say gangs, obviously, I'm in rural Iowa, so gangs are a little bit foreign of a concept to me. Can you go into a little bit of detail of like what gangs were there and what that actually looked like, that gang activity?
Well, back then it was heavy just because it was, you had movies out, you had a lot of things, trafficking, a lot of things going on, a lot of depression, a lot of everything going on in our communities back then. And so gangs really kind of controlled what happened, what goes on in your neighborhood, what money flows through, an economic system that's probably, more illegal. So, there were street gangs anywhere from your normal Bloods and Crips to organized crime to anything that you could think of that was happening. I can't pinpoint certain gangs, but I'm used to the Bloods and Crips or claiming your neighborhoods or your territories or your streets or where you're from or what side of town. So I don't know who ran those things and what the politics are on that, but it was there.
So as a child growing up in that, how did you or your family, whichever the case may be, how did you make sure that you stayed safe in that environment?
I think, well, with my family being bigger, I think the dynamic with us, it was just it was more of us, it's just power in numbers. But when it comes to who controls what or who's in your family involved in things, it's just I don't know how to really answer that. But I wouldn't call it a power struggle, but it's more of I thought growing up a lot of that was more of a protection type of deal.
Okay.
But as you get older, you learn that there's a lot of illegal activity that happens for that protection. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. When So obviously you moved away from Toledo at some point in time. How old were you when you moved away from Toledo, and where did you move to?
Yeah, so my first stint coming to Ottumwa I would have been in sixth grade. So that was my first actual move with my father out here to Iowa. Spent the year with him just to kind of adjust to what his life was and my life was at that time. But I spent the sixth grade year here. Things didn't work out between me and my father, so my grandparents wanted me to come back to Ohio. So I finished off junior high there and then moved back for my ninth grade year.
Okay.
And
So why Ottumwa? How did your dad end up in Ottumwa?
yeah, so that's a story for another topic at some point. But my dad and his brothers struggled with addiction, things of that nature. Like I said, there was a dynamic there in our city that kind of took over, and so my dad and his brothers kind of fell into that dynamic. But they also had the consciousness of we need to do better. You know what I mean? And so together, collectively, they made that transition to Iowa. What had happened in that situation is more so their sister married my uncle at the time. He's trying to get his life together, so they moved to Iowa because they have family out here already from the South. And so once that transition happened, then my aunt and her husband at the time wanted her brothers to come out to get clean and sober as well, and so they made that transition to Iowa.
So you moved back to Ohio after your sixth grade year.
My sixth grade year, yep.
And how long did you last back in Ohio before you ultimately ended up coming
decision.
back? And then, what made you? What was that? What was that thing that made you move back to Iowa?
So my seventh and eighth grade year, I transitioned back to Toledo with my mom. What made me make that transition is because of the environment that my father put me in while I was here in Ottumwa at that time. It wasn't sustainable at that time, and so my grandparents and my mom and them thought it was a better decision for me to go back. And so I spent seventh and eighth grade year in Toledo. It might have been one of my most challenging 2 years growing up ever because you get incorporated back into everything that's going on. I'm talking gangs, I'm talking everything you think of. If you're trying to be an athlete, if you're trying to be a drug dealer, any of that starts around, age 13, 12, 13, anyway, for me. So seventh and eighth grade year was pretty challenging, but we got through it.
Okay.
I think what ended up ultimately the goal was to be with my father because I was getting in a little trouble in those seventh and eighth grade years. And so my grandparents, along with my mom and some of my relatives, was like, I think it's a better option for him to go back to Iowa.
Okay.
At that time, my dad was clean and sober, and so it was the best option. He was married with my stepmom, and that was just a better opportunity for me to come out here. Plus, I had all the support, more support out here than I would have back then. So that's why the transition.
Okay.
And I made friends during those sixth grade years, and
there you go.
Some good family around here too during those sixth grade years. It made it a little easier.
Okay.
Made it a little easier.
With the move to Iowa, just knowing what the demographics looked like in that time frame, you had you probably, I'm guessing, had a little bit of a challenge coming here because at that time, while this community is diverse now, it was not so diverse at the time.
That's true.
How hard of a transition was that for you coming from someplace where there is a cultural mix, and coming to a place where there's really not?
So that transition for me was very challenging. You know what I mean? And you're used to a certain way, and then you come and have to adjust to a whole nother way of things, right? The good part is that I had some family here that already had been here that I could adjust, that had already adjusted a little bit, but I could adjust with. The bad part was that I felt like I was always just, he's just Kevin, he's just their cousin, or he's just, you know what I mean? And so that took a little bit, but as far as the culture, that was something that I had never indulged into a culture of just all one. You know what I mean? Like it's you guys and then us. You know what I mean? And it just felt like that. But I said this earlier. I think sport kind of helped bridge that gap.
Yeah.
So, but it was challenging. It was challenging, and everywhere from education to the type of friend, you know what I mean, and to the
Hmm.
type of trust. That part was challenging, but I also had good people that helped with that transition
Yeah.
too. So,
And what kind of sports did you play?
basketball and football,
Okay.
basketball and football.
And you did that, I'm assuming, all through school, or
I tapped into some track a little bit, but I'm not fast at all, as you could tell. I'm just long.
just long?
But basketball and football was it, and I always thought I was gonna make it to the NBA, as every inner city kid thought. But it just didn't work out that way. So
Okay.
football ended up being the journey. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I'm assuming you were able to find some community in the sports world.
absolutely, absolutely. And that, going back to your original question of how did I adjust coming here, this sports world helped that adjustment.
Okay.
Because if you notice it, I mean, it's full of culture anyway.
Right.
Rather your team is full of it and you go somewhere else, you're going to deal with it, you know. So, but that was kind of the, coming back here in ninth grade, you got to deal with it anyway.
Hmm.
So how do you adjust? How do you get better or learn or enjoy and incorporate? And so it was hard at first, but it was a little easier because I had the right friends and the right family already here.
Good.
Does that make sense?
So with, you had mentioned, part of your family had moved here. I'm assuming the other part stayed in Toledo. What did that dynamic look like? I'm assuming your grandparents probably stayed in Toledo, and the rest of your family was here. Am I off base
Nope,
on
you're
that?
you're 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 pretty spot on. So on my dad's side of the family, him and his brothers, most of them besides his youngest, were here.
Okay.
And then my mom's side, of course, is still there in Toledo. My dad's side of things, most of them are still there in Toledo as well, but a majority of us have migrated to Iowa.
Okay.
And so yes, that's that's really where it is. So my battle was always, okay, my mom's in Ohio and my dad's here in Iowa. And so that was always the battle of, when do I go home and when do I come here? And I felt like I was in college at one point,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing because the modern culture seems to be, you know, families aren't together anymore, and they're down the road from one another. They're not necessarily, that far apart, even though they are.
Right.
How do you, as a child, navigate that when one of your family members, your parents, is here in Iowa, and then the other one is hundreds of miles away? How did you navigate that?
Now that's a great question. That was the hardest navigation because as a child, you don't have that. You don't have that authority to say, okay, I want to, or hey, today I'm missing my mom. I want to go, or any of that. So that was a hard challenge of balancing my mom being there and my dad being here. I think what is it, 500 and something miles away. The adjustment is that you see everybody around you that have that, mom and dad and all that, and it's like you don't have that. So it was that was kind of hard. That was kind of hard, not gonna lie. But I also know too that in the culture that I come from, a lot of that is not happening anyway. So that adjustment, I also have more friends, I would say, back home that didn't have that dynamic anyway.
Okay.
So it was easier to go home and understand that. But here it's kind of like, where do you find that balance?
Gotcha.
Because most of your friends have that, and your family have that, but you don't. So yeah, that was one of my most challenging. And so
Okay.
we didn't have social media and how we can interact now back then. So it was, all right, how do I spend time over here with her, and how do I spend time here and make sure that I balance my friends and my life, and yeah,
As a
just have to
child,
learn it early.
that had to be somewhat difficult to cope with. I mean, because you haven't developed those coping mechanisms yet, and
Right.
I would think that would be somewhat of a difficult thing to cope with.
The hardest thing to cope with there, Mark, would be pleasing both parents. Like, I don't want to leave and go here because my mom's going to be mad, or I go over here, it's going to be a harder for my dad to, and then when it comes to sport or any events or any of that, not both parents are going to be there, so you have a lot of that. That was a mental challenge for me for a long time.
Hmm.
It was I struggled with that a long time.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you get through high school, and college. What did college look like for you?
So college, man, my first year was, man, everything came full head. You know what I mean? I attended the University of Nebraska in Omaha my freshman year, my first semester. Had a gruesome injury the first couple months into it. You know what I mean? And so that took a turn. But those early college years was a struggle because I didn't know how to adapt. I really didn't, especially after injury. But yeah, that was. I mean, you throw a person back into a whole bunch of culture again, and then you come from being, some kind of a good athlete in the community to being you're just a number out there. That
Yeah.
I felt almost like I did when I was moving here again. Almost, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Having to adjust to a whole new world. So my freshman year was a struggle.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Diving into that just a little bit, because it's difficult for a lot of people to understand, and we're in rural Iowa, so
Hmm.
it's difficult for us to understand. And I think people are starting to, as we see, more people migrate to the area, um, what that dynamic is really like. You mentioned, you know, you keep taking these dives back into, what you're just a number or whatever.
Right.
What's that like? To constantly having to shift and start all over again, because I'm black, or
Right.
how is that to deal with?
So I had this conversation the other day, and I don't want to get too touchy on it because I get emotional when it comes to it. But
Sure.
as far as I feel like being a black male, especially in a rural community like this, you get misunderstood a lot. And what I mean by that is that it's more of what everything else looks like compared to what you really know. In a smaller community, it's more so that it's like a microscope is on you all the time, if that makes sense. So you have to kind of watch how you talk, gotta kind of watch how you move, kind of watch who you're hanging with or any of that, because those things can be misconstrued or look a certain way based off of what the perception is of being a person of color, especially black in America. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? And so that navigation is completely different than what even my peers, you know what I mean? And so um, I can only talk to people that look like me to understand some of that, right? And
Sure.
so having close friends and things like that, they want to understand, they want to know, but to understand, it's just hard. You know what I mean? And
Right.
I think that's one of the most difficult, challenging things to talk about or even understand unless you are of us. You know what I
Right.
mean? And
No, yeah,
so
that makes sense.
yes, and so to answer that question, that's a hard navigation.
And we see it every day, and depending on the political climate,
Hmm.
the situation could be better or worse.
Right.
it, I'm not even part of that, and it infuriates me when I see it.
Hmm.
How how do you manage, when you see people that are, you know, overtly racist? I mean,
Hmm.
just to call a spade for a second. How do you manage that without losing your cool?
For me, that took a while, Mark. I'm gonna be honest. That took a while because I always felt like, at one point, I felt like you're always under attack from what we consider the other side, right? Like,
Hmm.
why does it feel like it's so much pressure from that end? And so, in order to get through that part, to understand that this is just what it is, that part is probably the most. I don't know how to say that. That's the hardest way to say, man, how do I deal with this right when it's in your face, right?
Hmm.
And so I've struggled with that a lot. But what I do now is try to understand the individual where they're coming from. Like
Okay.
if you're feeling that way or whatever, so what's that core? What's the reasoning for you feeling that way, right? Let's have that dialogue. Let's talk about it. Before it's like you don't even want to know. Let's fight about it. You know what I mean? Let's see.
Right.
Let's toughen it out and see what's from there. And then if you want to talk, let's see. But now it's more. as an adult now, it's just some people are miseducated or don't have the education.
Okay.
And so, I mean, as you know, you've seen how our education system is, and we see how things are going. What education do you have other than the media when it comes
Right.
to us? You know what I
Right.
mean? And so now it's now I try to understand. Okay, you feel that way, you talk that way, and it's right in my face. How do we deal with it? For us, we still have to.
Right.
You know what I mean? We
Absolutely.
still have to, no matter if you want to talk about it or not. You know what I mean? But that's a hard one.
Yeah.
It's a hard one, but it's easier when you can really talk to people. And I say it all the time. You're a human, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna get to know your human side first, and then we go from there.
Okay. Looking at, you've had kind of a luxury, and I hate using that word, but you've kind of had a luxury of seeing two different worlds. You've seen rural Iowa and you've seen big city America.
Yes.
How different does that look between those two cities? I mean, is it something, multiple cultures present? Is that something that's more widely accepted, or do you see the same thing just on a bigger scale in those bigger cities?
You see the same thing on a bigger scale, but it's easier to navigate when it's a bigger city because it's almost segregated anyway. If you think about it, right? When you go to a bigger city or any of that, you have these are these neighborhoods, these are these neighborhoods, right? So it's easier to navigate. But is the tension still there? Is the division still there? Absolutely. Once it bumps heads, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so in rural America, I mean, there's no for me, where's the outlet, especially in a community like ours.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's becoming more. We have some, but at the same time, it just is that considered macro or micro? It's just smaller, so
Mm-hmm.
it's more impactful.
Okay.
I kind of compare it to a bigger college or university compared to your smaller private. You're gonna get probably more attention just due to the fact that it's less people. Um, but the negative attention is even louder too because it's less people.
Right.
If that makes sense. So yeah.
You mentioned the education, and I find that particularly interesting. There's a quote that history is always written by the winners, and we've had a movement here in the last probably 5 years or so. I could be off on that, but of the educational component of critical race theory,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a heavy movement against
Mm-hmm.
critical race theory, which personally I find a little bit unfortunate because you're basically knocking out a piece of history where I think that you talk about ill education or no
Mm-hmm.
education. This especially in places where there isn't exposure to Black Americans or Native Americans or in some cases Hispanic Americans, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any absorption of it, so
Right.
they don't understand the history.
And I feel like for a Black American like myself, that's what's been. I mean, that's what's been one of the biggest challenges. So me growing up, if I didn't, when I moved to Iowa, that reflection of me went away. So in our education systems, we were able, being in a public school or in a African American community or a Black American community, you had representation in schools, even so, of what things look like and how we look, and professionals in our level or professionals in our color or any of that. Then it goes away when you get into rural
Hmm.
America, right? Like, where's all this teaching that I learned that these kids are not getting? You know what I mean? And so if you take that representation away and people aren't seeing what they look like and people doing things positive that look like you, how do you know what to do? How do you know
Right.
how to, what's the blueprint look like?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, you take those components out, then it's like, so everything looks like this.
Right.
And
Right.
that's how things were being taught. And I noticed that different component, especially more so when I moved here.
Okay.
That makes sense.
When So I want to rewind a little bit on the
Yeah.
story because there was something that we had talked about a long time ago, that I feel this might be a good time to interject into the conversation. You had mentioned exposure maybe from a mentorship perspective,
Hmm.
or whatever that looks like with Boys and Girls Club as you were growing up.
Hmm.
How does that fit into this picture and this conversation?
So that's perfect transition right there. That representation, what someone in a positive manner looks like. What there are people out here that is doing things the right way, that look like us, and so having a Boys and Girls Club in our community had that representation of professional, whether it's sport, educational, any of that. You had that representation at the Boys and Girls Club, and those that wanted to be involved or mentor or do any of that, you knew where a hub was. You could go and get that done. And so I think even as kids, we, not having the right households and things like that, you look for those representations, and having Big Brother, Big Sister, or Boys and Girls Clubs and things like that help you know or understand that those things are out there. We're out here. People are out here, and the resources are out here. It's just a matter of how to utilize them.
Right.
And so, yes, thanks for that question, because that's what it is. If you don't have that representation of yourself or what you look like doing things that you want to do, how can you
Hmm.
motivate or how can you inspire to do those things?
Right.
So,
Right. And your family, when you come to Iowa,
hmm.
you had some struggles with family here
Hmm.
as well.
Hmm.
Obviously, the Boys and Girls Club wasn't something that was a component of living in Ottumwa, Iowa. So
Right.
when you had struggles with family life when you got
Hmm.
back to Iowa, how did you fill that gap? Since that some of those mentorship role models weren't
Hmm.
there, and then you had some family role model issues. How did
That wasn't here.
that look?
So, and then man, how do I answer that? That's a good question, Mark. It looked like me and my cousins and those guys that were here already, helping each other out,
Okay.
along with the friends and family that we did grow and love here, that
Mm-hmm.
also helped us with that. So we ended up becoming young mentors, I guess I should say, at a young age, because we didn't have it here yet. You know what I
Okay.
mean? But there were some certain people and certain individuals in town, and they know who they are, that help with some of that mentorship, help us, navigate what we had to around here, and also making sure that we got through with the educational systems and things and understanding it here. So, and then we rely on our church a lot too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
so,
and you've made it pretty clear that faith is pretty important to you and your
absolutely,
family.
absolutely, and we're not, my family here. We're not attached to any certain church, but we're still attached to our faith. And so, having that too was really a bigger component out here because
Hmm.
we didn't have those other resources. So,
Okay.
yeah, each other. To answer your question, each
Each other,
other.
and
Yep.
sometimes that's all that matters. So
Seriously. Yep.
the there are so many stigmas around race relations in the United States right now.
Hmm.
Um, what is it that from a Black American perspective, because white people, they don't have that perspective, obviously. What is it from a Black American's perspective in respect to race relations, uh, are we missing the boat on? Does that question make sense?
I think so. I think the I wouldn't say a boat is being missed. I think what we fail to realize is that being a Black American, there's always been a divide for us. You know what I mean? We've always had to navigate that separation. Um, I think the boat is missed is that the more you understand us, the more we are more beneficial. The more you understand the brilliancy in someone that looks like me, the more you can understand that yes, we are different. We might think different, but how do you utilize those differences to make it powerful? I think
Hmm.
that's the biggest boat. I really believe that's missing. Like, we're so much stronger together, so much stronger with our differences, because our differences make. I'm not good at setting up any of this, right? But you are, you know what I mean? And putting that together makes things happen. But I think the biggest thing is that the laws in our country was not written for people of color. How do we change that to where it includes everybody?
Right.
You know what I mean? And it takes certain individuals to understand that there's certain people here that see things completely different than everybody. And
Right.
so, and that was what I thought our country was founded on, all those differences. So bring those differences back to make it positive.
Yeah.
I think
Eh,
that's the ball that's missed. Like,
okay. Yeah. There's a book called Freakonomics, and one of the chapters in the books speaks to a couple of key issues. One of them is the thought process that was behind projects in major cities, and how that shaped the inner city culture, not to a good degree by any stretch of the imagination. And then, looking forward a couple of decades to see exactly what kind of harm setting those
yes.
projects actually are. And then this might be a very sensitive topic to people, but abortion rights and how that, profoundly impacted Black America. And I always am interested when I hear, specifically from the white community, their opinions on what inner cities look like, but the denial of,
what
caused that, and how do we get past that? Because you're right, I don't think that the laws were necessarily written for everybody, and you can see that in the Constitution of the United States, that it wasn't written for everybody. It wasn't written for Black people, it wasn't written for women. So and I guess where I'm going with all of that is, those are some pretty epic challenges for all of us to overcome. And,
Yes.
I'm not a smart enough person to figure out how you go past that.
Right. And two things that came to my mind right now, and two words that came to my mind right now is acknowledgement and accountability. If we can acknowledge what has happened, understand what has happened, hold ourselves accountable for what has happened, and move forward, seems pretty easy. But we know it's not.
Right.
Where's it start? And I really, in my heart, I feel like it start like this. You know what I mean? You want to know something? Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't have to fight. We don't have to fight. We don't have to. We could disagree. You know what I mean? We don't have to love each other or like each other, but we can understand each other and appreciate each other. I think that's where it's starting. Right here. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. I've always said that, and let's talk about it. But
Yeah. And
acknowledgement and accountability.
Right.
Yep.
And I do, and I'm coming from a place of ignorance because I'm not a Black American, and I live in rural Iowa. So
And there's nothing wrong with that.
but from a perspective, it's hard for me to understand all of that. And I look at some of the things that happen on the news, especially as it relates to large cities, inner cities, and
Yep.
the perspective gets twisted, and the media. I'm 100% certain that's very intentional on the part of the media, depending on which side you're trying to look at it from. But you see race relations in major cities, and it doesn't appear like they're trying as much as they probably should have. And I mean the elected the elected bodies in the major cities.
And that's true too. What it looks like is one thing, but when you're there, it's completely different. And I've witnessed going to some of the bigger cities, and everything I'm hearing, I don't see a lot of it. Also, we do see a lot of the. Any bigger anything, you're gonna have bigger crimes or bigger anything, right? And so you're gonna have that. But when you go there and you don't feel that, you're gonna look like, okay, what was this narrative, right? As everybody call it. But a lot of times, if you go there, experience it, and if you're having those experiences, you can speak and reflect on it. But if you're only talking about it from someone giving it to you from either the news or any of that, it's just like telephone, like when we were kids. It's gonna get
Right.
It's going to get twisted.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And to your point, you look at, you mentioned in Toledo,
Hmm.
as you were younger, you were seeing crack cocaine,
Correct.
it was infiltrating the cities. And, it's one thing to hear that on the news and thought, oh, it's such a big inner city problem. But
Right.
someone who grew up in rural Iowa
Hmm.
at the exact same time, different drugs, same circumstances.
Correct.
We had an infiltration of methamphetamine at the
Correct.
exact same time that was going a long way to start the process of decimation of the rural communities.
Uh-huh.
So, again, what color lenses do you want to put on? Because it's kind of the same thing, just different drug, different town,
Hmm.
but it's the same thing.
The
Yeah.
effect is the same, right? How things transpire, though, could be very different, but at the same
Oh,
time,
absolutely.
the issues become the same, right? Here it is 25, 30 years later. This is what we're talking about, right? The
Yeah.
effects of it, right? That's the hard thing. Mark, being black and in America, we've seen a lot of that. We've seen ourselves be portrayed as negative on the news. You know what I mean? We've
Hmm.
seen the divide. We've seen the differences in the justice system. We've seen a lot of what's happening right now way before it started happening.
Yeah.
And so to sit back and see it untwine, and everybody's now like, holy smokes, we do have something going on here. It's going to take those people that feel like when you see that what's happening is not right, what are you doing about it?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well,
What
and
can we do about it?
one thing that you just said that I find really interesting, and I hear this a lot, not just from Black Americans, but
Hmm.
also Hispanic Americans. Uh, we see things happening, and people of color are going, "Hey, I see where this is going, and this
Hmm.
isn't good." The other side, the people who are white, are going, "We don't see a problem."
Hmm.
Obviously, there's a problem.
Hmm.
How how do we get past that? And how I, I'm stuttering here on my words, and I don't
No,
mean to.
no. I think I know.
If you know it's a problem, number one,
Hmm.
how do you scream it from the rooftops loud enough that people actually understand, hey, I see where this is going?
Right.
And how do the people who do, that you would quote unquote call your allies,
Hmm.
how do they help in that process? That way we can start to bridge those gaps.
Yep. I that's a great word. The ally part of it, those same allies that's helping have to help with white people that's like I don't care, that don't see that, you know what I mean, bringing it out, exposing it, having them understand or see or navigate the same way to see that, hey, maybe do you not see those differences now, you know what I
Hmm.
mean, but if you so far out of it and you don't care, your mind isn't going to go there, then you're almost a lost cause.
Yeah.
And right now, I feel like in our country, we have too many of those. It's too many of those. But as far as I really wish I had the answer, other than, again, acknowledgement and accountability.
Hmm.
If Mark see someone like blatantly, this is not right or whatever, what's Mark doing to hold that We talk about that in the justice system. If one cop is bad, two cops are good. This one cop being bad, and these two cops not saying nothing about that one cop. Now you got three bad cops.
Yeah.
So
No, that makes perfect sense.
it becomes that, and so yeah,
Okay.
I say like what we do with on the back end, reach one to teach one, each one at a time, one at a time.
Yeah.
Reach one, teach one.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time. Yeah, I moved to Oklahoma for a short spell, and even somebody growing up in rural America, it always amazes me as today as we stand here, as much as we've grown as a nation, as much as, we have culturally diversified in our country, there are certain things that still exist. And for the life of me, I can't understand why and how. As an
That is still
example,
around.
I go to Oklahoma to live for a couple of years, and the first week that I'm there, I turn on the news and there are reports of a young black woman being dragged down the street, murdered by the KKK.
Okay.
And quite honestly, first and foremost, I'm like, and just, disbelief of that still exists,
Right.
and then obviously, how could somebody value human life so little?
Hmm.
But, it's like, how do people even exist like that any longer?
Man, that question is still up for grabs, right? Just hearing that though, um, I'm gonna use that as a scenario or as an example. How do you think if I was in Oklahoma and I heard that news, how does that affect me?
I would,
You know what I mean?
I can't answer that.
And so to understand that there is a type of people or a certain group of people that can think of that as, so it's not happening here. It's no, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
To me, that's the problem.
It's
That's
terrifying.
terrifying, right? And so how do we keep educating people that we're not the boogeyman?
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And now you're see now I think what happens with social media, it exposes a lot of things that a lot of people have been saying for a long time also. So which has been a good thing. But to hear that, how long ago was that, Mark?
Uh, 2010,
See, and you would think that you would hear something like that in what years,
1960s. I mean,
right?
that's what you would think.
When people considered America great.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
just it's like wait, hold on, man. Like, but to acknowledge that though, was the news acknowledging it? Those things was happening. Did it hit
No,
national news? Did it,
no,
did it?
absolutely not.
So then but had 10 black people did something that shouldn't have or whatever, and it could have got national exposure, it would have been everywhere.
Right.
So I don't know. That's a great question. That was a great question.
Yeah, and I to the point of social media,
Hmm.
while I do think that social media is sometimes good for that educational component of exposing people to things that maybe they wouldn't necessarily have been exposed for. I would
What's
say
real?
the contrary, that it could be bad for that exact same reason, because
Absolutely.
for every, I would say for every one educational component that you get, um, you can see probably 20
Hmm.
examples of either apathy or just straight hate
Right.
online.
Right.
And with the volume of documentaries that have come out, and even the last 2 years talking about you know uh, bullying in general,
Hmm.
or catfishing, or intimidation, especially from a racial standpoint.
Hmm.
Social media can literally be the devil in some cases.
Good and evil. Good and evil. Good and evil. And I mentioned that to my wife the other day. I said there's two components that's critical right now. I feel like in life that have that good and evil component. Really, at one point it was money. Now it's our phone and social media.
Hmm.
So now you've added another component. So what's going to be the third? But what's scary right now is that just like you said, you were mentioning other things. Now you add in artificial intelligence as well. So now what's going to be fake and what's real?
Hmm.
So,
And it's almost impossible to tell now.
and I'm gonna tell you this as a person of color, that's very scary.
Yeah, I bet.
You know what I mean? That's very scary. And so I had somebody say that to me the other day that back when we were growing up, it was more like, okay, we can distinguish that was okay, that's real. Now you might have five fake things that only one or two can be real in those five. And you got to sort out what's real now.
Hmm.
That's scary. That's scary.
Now you, let's try to lighten the
Yeah.
mood up just a little bit here. You mentioned, your wife, you know, you obviously got through college and started your career and everything, and found yourself a lovely lady along the way,
Man,
and
I'm unlucky.
uh, we usually all end up saying that.
Yeah, man.
So what does family look like for you now?
So family look for me went going from a household of 2 to 5. Um, it looks life for me looks great. I can't complain. I found the love, or the love of my life found me, I should say. I got married late. Um, we're going coming up on our 2 year anniversary in 2 days.
Oh,
On the
happy
30th. So
anniversary.
thank you. Um, what it looks like for me now is my wife and my family is my safe.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I don't feel like I ever had that, and I wanted to touch on that earlier. I think that's where it was growing up. I never felt safe, whether it was home, whether it was with my father, my mom, my grandparents, or any of that. I never really felt safe. You know what I'm saying? And so, what life looks like now in the light and the mood, it looks very safe. I have a best friend that we chose each other. We were able to choose ourselves to be best friends with each other, and man, have we been through it. When we first got together, I was struggling with my cancer issues, and I'm thinking that she was just going, hey, I'm going to go through this. If you want to leave, run. She stuck by me, and
Awesome.
the rest is what they call history, right? So family looks great now. We had prom pictures yesterday for Sawyer. So my dynamic now, it's me and Kerrigan, which is my daughter of a previous relationship, back my high school sweetheart. So Kerrigan, she'll be 22 next month. Sawyer, who just turned 16, he's just came from prom last night. Cardinal had homecoming, or I'm sorry, not prom, homecoming. They had homecoming. We took pictures and all that good stuff. Friday game. Addie's Spitfire. She's our 13-year-old. She shows us what we can be in our community, in our lives, or any of that. And so she's amazing. And then I got a lot of extended family, as you know, cousins, relatives, all that. But life's good, man.
Awesome.
Life's good.
So to kind of round this conversation out, you've created a solid family unit now. How do you educate your children to navigate this world that we have?
And I'm gonna go back. I'm glad you asked that question. And you said something earlier, but I feel like it start in our households. Everything starts right where we have the control. And what I do with our kids, I let our kids know, no matter what, there's good humans and there's bad. You separate the two. Don't let the color, don't let a disability, don't let a religion, a political, or any of that affect how you view that human and the humans around you. If you can, and then teach history, understand where you come from, understand who your people are, why you tick the way you do, why you move the way you do. We try to teach our kids that, and we try to teach them a lot of happiness, a lot of fun, and go from there. Now we know all things happen, but
And I assume that faith is, again, part of that as well.
huge part, and I haven't mentioned a lot of that, but yes, our faith together with all of that, it works itself out. It works itself out, and we struggle with certain things, but we also have a good support system too, and I think that matters as well.
Well, knowing some of your other family members, I'd agree with you. You have a great support system.
Oh yeah, we do, and I appreciate every single one of them. You know what I mean? And to me, that's how I tick. That's how I move, with all that extra support.